Hello, everyone. It is me, Known Wells, creator of Yumi Empathy. Today, on episode 13, Tony and I take a deeper dive into creating healthy boundaries and intimacy with ourselves and the people in our lives. I talk about emotional intimacy. I get a little vulnerable, a lot vulnerable, and talk about a little bit of sexual intimacy. And Tony shares with me how he sort of walks his patients through creating better boundaries with themselves and the people in their lives, and learning to say no, figuring out what our needs are, and exploring what safety is and what safe people are in our lives. So a lot of great stuff on this episode. The disclaimer for the show is that Yumi Empathy is for informational and or entertainment purposes only. It's not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Okie dokie, artichokes. Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet or rated and reviewed the show, I love 5 stars. That would be awesome. Go do that. Go to just iTunes and leave us a review, and maybe I'll read it on the show. That would be fun. And check us out on Patreon, too. Patreon.com/YumiEmpathy. This morning, I just posted a little behind-the-scenes photo. And I share some bonus audio there from time to time. And you get some cool stuff in return as well, like stickers and maybe guest spots and whatnot. So that's at patreon.com/YumiEmpathy. Alrighty. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for empathizing with us. Enjoy episode 13 on boundaries and intimacy.
La la la, you, me, empathy, yeah, la la la.
Welcome to episode 13 of Yumi Empathy, a podcast about exploring the struggles we face in our day-to-day lives as humans trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of Yumi Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our neuroses, our mental illnesses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire conversation and insight so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being human. Yumi Empathy is a safe place, a conversation between friends, a place to inspire the empathy and beauty in each of us. Today in episode 13, I am here again, as I always am, sometimes.
Maybe every couple weeks.
Some of the time, with Tony Rumeinke. Hello, Tony.
Hey, Known. How are you, buddy?
We're here again for Tony time.
We're here again. How quickly it comes.
I know. Tony time. The Tone and Known show. The Known and Tone show.
Tone and Known, as I've referred to it.
Yeah.
Whatever. Giving myself higher billing, but
yeah.
Yes.
Listeners, if you have a fun sort of name for this type of episode of Yumi Empathy, let me know. Because we're into puns. We're into silliness. All that good stuff. So in this episode, we're going to be chatting about intimacy and boundaries. If you haven't listened to episode 12 with Paul Gilmartin, my guest, go back and listen to that. We talk a lot about boundaries and a little bit about intimacy, but in this episode, we're going to sort of explore those topics and get into intimacy a little bit more. We're going to get intimate together.
We're going to get intimate.
Yeah.
And with our million listeners.
It's the Tone and Known and Bone show.
Correct.
Sorry about that.
Bad humor.
Yeah, dad humor. I'm not a dad,
but jokes.
Yeah, I'm into dad jokes, quote unquote. Okay, so let's get into it. What I guess where I want to start is one of the areas that I'm curious is if you have had experience with patients, Tony, is, well, actually, let's back up. First, tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and do your little disclaimer thingy.
A little disclaimer thing.
Yeah.
You got it. Hello, listeners. I am, so if you're listening for the first time, maybe you've heard me on other podcasts or this particular podcast. So my name's Anthony Romeike, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist here in California. So my license is held here with the Board of Behavioral Sciences in the state of California. And my license number, to be all official and everything, is LMFT 47805. And so I practice psychotherapy here as a licensed marriage and family therapist and have been doing so for a few years. And maybe if you've listened to me before, you've heard I feel like the luckiest guy in the world. I have the coolest job, and I get to share that and talk about it. So
cool, and I'm happy you're here, buddy.
well, I'm always glad to be here.
Good to hear. So one of the things that struck me in my conversation with Paul Gilmartin is the word covert incest.
Yes.
He mentioned.
Correct.
Do you have experience talking with patients about this?
I do. It might be more common maybe than people are aware or maybe are even familiar with that term. I'm not quite sure many people are probably familiar with that term. And first of all, what an awesome person Paul Gilmartin
Right?
is.
Isn't he the best?
He really is the best. I mean, I love that episode. I've listened to it actually a couple times, part of preparing for today, but also just out of enjoyment. And, few thoughts. He's so knowledgeable on this topic. He's obviously done so much of his own work, which, comes across in his ability to talk about what he's accomplished and done. And he just has such a warm presence, even over a forum like this, knowledgeable, personable, warm. So what a great, awesome guest in person. And I really, really enjoyed the podcast, but thinking of that particular topic, this idea of covert incest. He had mentioned the book by Ken Adams, Silently Seduced, which is actually one of my favorite books as well. And I think I'd shared with you not long ago that I actually had the privilege of receiving some training under Ken Adams, because he's one of the educators, trainers for the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals, which is actually the organization that I'm certified with as a sex addiction therapist. And so I've had the privilege of, being with Ken as he's provided training in one of those particular modules. And he's great. I mean, so that's his book. And so we've talked about it outside of the module, and one of my favorite books. So again, probably not a very well-known topic, but it's again kind of this idea that in a family dynamic, in a family system, has one of the parents covertly, I'm not even sure this is going to be the accurate word or not, but kind of surrogatized one of the children, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's kind of a surrogacy that's occurred with one of the children, and it's so essentially one of the parents from very covert type of place, so not overt but covert, has risen one of the children up to essentially take place of the other parent or spouse in maybe an emotional way, maybe in a covert, sexual way. And what we mean by that is not necessarily that there is anything sexual happening. There's no, maybe, molestation or anything that's occurring, but just, using the child to meet the emotional needs of a parent who should be getting those emotional needs met from their spouse or partner.
Right.
So, and I would say it probably happens, more often than most people are probably aware of. And some, have come in to work with me, not necessarily even being aware of, maybe that's what the dynamics of the family were. But as we've maybe processed and explored the family system, it's not completely uncommon that something like that is brought to light and the person recognizes that they were raised up, to an equal level when that wasn't kind of the right natural, dynamic for them as a child.
Yeah, the term itself, covert incest, is much more titillating than what it actually means.
Absolutely, because of course we think of incest,
right.
We think of inappropriate sexual relationships, between family members. But this is, again, it's emotional. So there is an emotional bond, or there's an emotional dynamic that's occurring. And again, a child is being used in a way that's, not appropriate, and certainly not healthy for them in terms of where they are developmentally. And certainly that's not their role with the parent. So,
yeah, I can certainly relate to that. I mean, I think there was some inappropriate sort of emotional aggrandizing, something in I would say in my relationship with my mother for sure. And, I really related to Paul on that respect. When patients come to you with this specific, I mean, obviously they're probably more than likely, like that's the work that you're doing to uncover that.
Sure.
Right? Like what's the work to get through that? Like if you have someone like Paul who has had this sort of relationship with his mother and it was inappropriate and he was sort of emotionally captive by her.
Sure.
Like how do you work through that as a patient and what kinds of things are you doing with your patients for those?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it really comes through the process of the work, and I think as a marriage and family therapist, we're always working on family systems. We're always looking at the family dynamics and the relational dynamics of a person who's coming in with, whatever it is, particularly, their issue of presentation is. And so, we're trained to look at family systems. We're trained to look at the dynamics within a family, what's happening for this person, interpersonally, intrapsychically, and what's been the influence of that dynamic or that system, on this particular person. What's their role been in the family? Mm-hmm. What role did they take on? What function did that serve? Which is always fascinating, when clients start doing that work and they start looking at, what role did I play? What role did a sibling play? How did we meet maybe the needs of our parents in ways we weren't aware of? And maybe that doesn't serve us well now. Maybe we've developed patterns of relational behaviors or, relating that we don't like any longer. It doesn't work for us. I love what Paul said, as he obviously did his work and recognized his role, that the role that he had kind of been placed in with his mom and recognizing that, what sounded like as he was kind of sharing that was recognizing that, a problem with boundaries arose for him,
right?
Because obviously what that had sounded like to me and what I see in my room quite often is that those norm appropriate boundaries have not been either taught, modeled, and they've been broken. And so a lot of times I'll see clients have to deal with the fact that they don't know what healthy boundaries are necessarily. They don't understand that they can have boundaries. They've been broken so often, or they've been, they've kind of suppressed inside of themselves their natural intuition of like, that doesn't feel right. They've kind of pushed that out of awareness, so they've pushed that down. And as Paul mentioned, a lot of times we'll go to other things to no longer feel those things, right? We'll go to substance abuse. We'll go to other behavioral or process-based addictions.
You mentioned pornography.
Yeah, pornography, sex addiction, workaholism. And there's a lot of gambling, a lot of different things we can do to kind of numb and suppress and escape. But I guess the work itself, is process oriented and exploratory, and usually is, you're working with a client over time, and again, you're kind of assessing and evaluating and examining these types of family system based dynamics. It's usually the client awareness that starts to present, when the client starts to understand, I think I may have served the emotional role for my father, or I may have served the emotional role for my mother. It's like I might have taken the place of a spouse and I wasn't aware of that. It's, I think yet to think of a client, maybe unless they've done their own work, come in and already be aware of this, the position that they've had. And so it usually comes out through the work over some time.
How do we get to a place where, as you're describing that, as I'm listening to Paul's story, as I'm sort of thinking about my story, like the running theme is that we get to a certain, emotional sort of level, and we have the perspective, and we start to see a therapist or whatever. We start to do the work, and it's at that point we realize, oh, those aren't great boundaries,
right?
Like how do we get to a place where we are learning good boundaries, from the get-go?
Yeah, wow.
Do you see a future like that?
I would love to see a future, and I hope, that more people become more aware, through podcasts like this, or other ways in which we can, kind of enrich the knowledge of our communities and the families that we find ourselves in. I would love to be able to educate people on what healthy boundaries are, and the appropriateness of behavior, and that, what healthy boundaries look like in a family setting. And where is it that we need to be getting our emotional needs met, and the fact that a parent needs to be getting their emotional needs met, hopefully somewhat learning to do that, themselves, also having to learn to do that in a healthy way with their spouse, and maybe through friends, peers, a therapist, and I mean, that would be incredible. I mean, if we could have that within our families, so that kids could learn as they're developing what a healthy boundary looks like, what that feels like, that they can pay attention to what they feel, and that's important, and they can express what they feel. And if they're uncomfortable, that they can express that and say, I'm not comfortable with that, even if they're not quite sure why they're uncomfortable with it, but that can be heard and that can be validated. I feel like that is so important. And that's, I feel like so much of the work that sometimes comes up for clients is recognizing that they really have a voice and that they've turned that voice off. Maybe they never had it at all. Maybe that's something that they're becoming aware of. Maybe they've never had a voice, or maybe they've learned to turn the voice off. And a lot of times what I see in clients, we've touched on this with mindfulness when we've, talked on that topic, and even trauma and different topics that we've talked about, which is really this disconnection from self and emotions and feelings,
right,
and even the body. And I think this is another place where that comes up, no longer listening to yourself, or never having listened to yourself. How do you set a healthy boundary? How are you aware of something that may not feel right for you? And how do you know to be assertive? And how do you know to talk about that? Unless, again, you've been modeled, that in a healthy family system, healthy family environment.
Yeah. You're just setting yourself up for failure. You're setting yourself up for these things unless you have the systems, unless you have the parenting that is setting those and modeling those healthy behaviors in terms of boundaries and stuff.
It's hard. I mean,
Yeah.
If you've not experienced it, or if your boundaries were repeatedly broken, and or you were not validated, as a child, your thoughts and your feelings and your expression of those things were never supported or validated. It's really hard to do it in your adult life. It's really, really difficult. Paul's example, which was, phenomenal, an amazing example of the guy stealing CDs from him.
Yeah.
And not, the guy who's stealing the, CDs being aware that Paul is observing him being, stealing the CDs, and Paul recognizing that he wasn't able to confront this person about that, was such a wonderful example of that disempowerment.
Yeah.
Within us, that teaches us, or we may learn from from a very early place, if we've not been taught boundaries, or again, if we were taught not to pay attention to them or not have them, then what do you do with that, right? I mean, that's such a wonderful example of something where, he wasn't able to assert himself. He wasn't able to demonstrate his value for himself. He wasn't able to protect himself, of which obviously now he reports having done a lot of work around, and it really sounds like it. So,
yeah.
But really hard in adult relationships, right? I mean, to be able to do that then if you've never done it.
So let's talk about the people that come to you. How do you, what are the sort of tenets of good boundary setting for yourself, like personally? I mean, obviously it's going to vary from person to person,
Sure.
But like, what are like some good sort of core things that you need to be aware of and implement to create healthy boundaries?
The first thing that comes to my mind is being self-connected.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it really does vary, to person to person. I mean, there are some, I think major significant ones, right? We know what's inappropriate or sexually inappropriate. I think
Right.
most of us have an idea of that, unless again, our sexual norms have been broken and violated. But I think most of us have an intuitive sense of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. But, some things might be more subtle, very subtle, and a lot of, this idea again of covert, incest can be very subtle. I mean, it can be very subtle. It can be subtle to the overt. I mean, it can be the whole spectrum. But I think helping people regain a connection with themselves is really a significant and core tool, intervention, process, if you will, for that particular client. Because I think it's important if they're self-connected, if they're self-aware, if they have mindfulness, as we've been talking about, if they really have that kind of connection to themselves, then, and they've done some work around this particular issue as well, so there's some insight and awareness around this as well, then they're going to know, they're going to feel when something doesn't feel right.
Right.
And the difference is they're going to, hopefully, having done some work around this, they're going to be able to actually assert themselves and set a good boundary and empower themselves by being able to say, no, thank you.
Right.
Right. That's not...
And feel okay with that.
And actually be okay with that.
And feel confident in your choices.
Yeah, just, kind of know, as, I can't remember if you said it or maybe Paul had said it, but just kind of know that space between self and other, there's a good understanding of what that space looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a good understanding that we're separate. You're a distinct, separate human being. I'm a separate, distinct human being. And our boundaries are important. And, and I do kind of have a impenetrable shield around me, so to speak, when it comes to these particular type of boundaries, and really being able to stand up, for yourself and know to know that that's okay.
Yeah.
That's such an important thing. And I think, again, people who have grown up in families where it wasn't okay to have a boundary, again, struggle with that. And they struggle to know that it's actually okay that they have a boundary.
Yeah.
They really struggle to know that it's okay for me to say no. There's so many people who obviously really struggle to be able to say no and to know that they can.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's, it's really about developing that voice.
Yeah, I see in myself and people I know pretty often that feeling of I can't say no, or that feeling of like, if I say no to this invite to a party or whatever,
sure.
like there's so much like shame and guilt wrapped up in these decisions. But, and I get that, like I've been there and I continue to be there in some respects from time to time, but getting to a place where we have the self-awareness and confidence in our own abilities or our own choices, and I mean that's the self-care part of it, right? We're saying,
absolutely.
Hey, you know what? Like I'm actually not feeling up for it, and you don't have to lie. Like just tell the truth, be honest. Like that's it can become an empowering thing.
Sure.
At first, it can feel tough, but getting to that place is pretty great.
It is, and to your point exactly, it's a practice.
Yeah.
And we don't do it perfectly.
No.
I mean, and it's not about perfection. And and I would say to various degrees, we all have areas of struggle around boundaries, and sometimes we do say no to something, and maybe we're not completely honest, because we're a little concerned about somebody's feelings and we don't want to hurt their feelings. But for some people, it's a huge area, and it's it impairs their functioning. It impairs their mental health. It can be, these are people who can really come in reporting severe depression and burnout. Yeah. Because they've tried their whole life to make everybody around them happy. And let's be honest, that's impossible. I mean, you're all your best attempts, you're not going to make everybody happy.
No.
I mean, it's just completely impossible. And yet, many people grew up with the belief, because again, of how the system around them worked, is that was, one of their most important priorities was try and make everybody else around them happy, and that they couldn't have their own needs. And, again, that is really overwhelming. And that is really, really potentially going to prone somebody for burnout and exhaustion and loss of self. I mean, where's my self?
Your identity is wrapped up in their feelings.
What do I like?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is about the external. Everything is about looking at the needs of other people around you and not looking at your own needs. And, I've worked with people before who have shared, they're just not even aware of what their needs are. If you ask them, what is it you enjoy? What is it you get from that relationship? What is it that you want to do? And, a big struggle trying to identify those things. And, because again, so much external focus has always been put on other people around them and making them happy. So, so I mean, a lot of the good work looks like that, helping people develop that. And then again, just letting them know that it's really actually okay for them to set boundaries. But it's a practice. I mean, I think like a lot of the good things we talk about here, this is something that we practice. Hopefully we get better at it, and we feel more empowered as we get better at it. And hopefully that leads to, better relational satisfaction, enjoyment, intimacy. I mean, I know that's one of the things we'll be talking about today. And I think that's the intimacy part that speaks to this issue of boundaries that we're talking about.
What does an intimacy issue look like? I mean, I know that's super broad, and intimacy can be, composed in a variety of settings and contexts. But when I think of intimacy, and I didn't have this conversation with Paul, but the first thing that came to my mind is, my relationship with my wife.
Sure.
And how we are not necessarily sexual intimacy, but like just how we are emotionally intimacy.
Sure.
Emotionally intimate.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that we've actually discovered recently is that we have some incompatibilities in terms of our emotional connection. I find that I can get a little bit more like hypersensitive emotionally.
Sure.
When I'm feeling, when I feel, down or I feel agitated or struggling in some way. And Jessica is sometimes, I wouldn't say the opposite, but like she just processes those things differently. And then she feels that she like can't be there for me emotionally.
Yeah.
Like she like, her words were, she felt like, she was failing me in a way. And, she's not failing me, that's the reality. But like, we've discovered, like, she might hate me that I'm talking about this, but we've discovered that we have some emotional compatibilities, and we're going to actually go to my therapist and actually talk about them, because that's a healthy sort of communication thing to do.
Yeah.
What kinds of, when you talk to your patients about healthy intimacy and intimacy struggles, like what kinds of things are you working on?
Well, I'm just, to maybe connect what you were even sharing.
Sure.
And maybe pull these things together. What I was thinking about was, the two, you mentioned the two of you are going to be maybe doing some therapy around this and talking about it. And that's intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I thought that was just such a great example of kind of what intimacy can look like, what a component of intimacy can look like, which is this idea that we're sharing. I mean, we're being authentic, and we're really sharing some issues that we're aware of, within the couple. And I'm trusting you with my sharing, my truth, my experience. And she's trusting she's trusting you with hers. Mm-hmm. And through that, the two of you made yourselves vulnerable, I'm assuming, so there's some vulnerability to your sharing by saying, I'm feeling this, and she's able to share that she's feeling this. And the two of you are, in a similar dynamic, there's a creation of connection that's happening, through this sharing, this equal sharing and vulnerability process. And what I find with clients and when I work with clients is in that authentic sharing is where where intimacy can start to be built. And it's in an, again, in an honest exploration and sharing and making yourself vulnerable, healthy, because again, this is where boundaries are important. You want to make sure that you're sharing with somebody who you can trust. And this kind of ties back in again to some of the, earlier things we've talked about today, is that becomes part of your assessment process and determining who are safe people.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important part of this process as well, maybe that we didn't touch on too much, but being able to determine who is a safe person is going to be a really significant part of this process. And again, if you grew up in a family system in which you may have not had the healthiest people around you, you may not make the best decisions about who are safe people.
Right.
And so also learning who are safe people. So whom can I really share my truth with? Who can I really share my honest feelings with? That's important. And so I think it's important that there is a certain level of trust with, whom you're in relationship with. again, if you're going to share these type of vulnerabilities with, so you can work towards healthy intimacy. But I think intimacy in general, there are many components to this. And I think one is safety, as we've talked about before. I think safety is always such an integral part of a healthy relationship. The other is reciprocity. That there's a healthy balance between the partners. And again, that's not always going to look 50-50 in every scenario, but we're talking about a general overall process of reciprocity in which there is a balance in the relationship between the two partners, and that, there is a ongoing give and take, in this relationship. I think authenticity is a huge part of intimacy, again, and vulnerability, and allowing yourself to be real and allowing yourself to be known by another person is scary, and it can be very overwhelming. It can be very frightening. Maybe if you've not had good experiences with that in the past, particularly if you've grown up in a healthy family, then wonder, that's such a great thing, and it's probably a little easier. If you've had that benefit, then you probably identify healthy, safe people, and so the sharing is probably a natural outpouring of that dynamic. But allowing yourself to be authentic and allowing yourself to share and to be known, a little pun there, is just such a wonderful thing. And again, I think that's where intimacy in a relationship is built. And then you have the other expressions of that, because when a lot of people, I think maybe if they think of intimacy or intimacies, they think of it from a sexual point of view. And no, that's just one form of intimacy. I think
penises, vaginas, butts, all those things,
whatever, right? All that stuff. But it's what I always share is, part of my thoughts on this always is that, in the true connection and in true intimacy between two people where there's, love and there's, just this connectedness, this intimacy and connectedness, then sex just becomes an outpouring of that. It becomes another expression of what is core and central to the relationship. And so sex is demonstrative, it's a demonstration of the health of a relationship. And that's something that I'll look for, working with a couple. I'll always kind of examine or want to know what exactly might the sexual intimacies of a relationship look like, because that is usually a pretty good barometer to kind of let me know what is happening in the core relationship or the central relationship. Can they feel safe with one another, and are they authentic? And are they known? Can they express their needs? Do they feel like their needs are met? And not all of our needs are ever going to be met. That's not the point. But just, can our needs be heard?
Yeah.
Can they be heard? Can they be validated? And that's, I think that sometimes is enough, even in issues of incompatibility, to recognize, we don't see eye to eye on this, and maybe we don't even match up, ideally, but you understand what I'm needing, and you attempt to make your best efforts towards those. But I feel known by you, and I feel understood, and I feel that you value what's important to me. And sometimes that really means a lot.
Yeah, I'm glad you're saying all those things, because the vulnerability, the authenticity, the willingness to listen and know, the people in your life, that to me is I think that's how we connect and how we grow and just create like the richest types of relationships, whether it's sexual or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's funny, what flashed in my mind is I've done some work with a group of men recently, and I was kind of thinking about that and recognizing that, and certainly not all, but certainly, men, I think, can certainly struggle with this at times because, I think culturally and maybe even in a gender way, we're not necessarily, supported, or taught to be maybe more emotionally connected or certainly emotionally expressive.
Right.
And I think as men, sometimes I think we struggle to be connected with other men then, and I think we struggle to be known. I think we struggle to be authentic, and we tend to just, a term I use quite often is we just continue to be self-contained units, not needing anybody, but never ever really being connected, and again, not ever being really known. And if we're missing that then in our primary relationship, maybe in a marriage or in a, significant other relationship, then where are we getting it at all?
Because we need it, right?
We need it
to live.
Absolutely. I think it's such a vital, and I think, again, it's a spectrum-based issue in terms of the need. I think some people need it more than others, and there are various reasons for that. But I think, we're connective beings.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're designed for connection, and all, the work that's been done around early attachment and early bonding, and the impact of that, I think we now know is so significant, in terms of later adult functioning, relational functioning, happiness and satisfaction versus pathology. So yeah, I mean, we're connected beings. So
connected beings.
we are meant to be connected beings.
Beans.
Beings.
Beans. I don't know if this is whatever. Jessica doesn't listen to the show. Speaking of my relationship with my wife, Jessica.
I feel fine. She's going to get mad at you. So
no, I mean, I think we have an amazing relationship, and we communicate very well. And when we do have moments of frustration with each other, we always are authentic with one another, and we talk about it, and we understand, where is this coming from? Like, why is it happening? And I feel so thankful for that. To have a partner like that is so important, and to have someone in my life like you who, who is willing to do this show, and like this show is an outpouring of like my urge to do more of this connecting and more of this authentic work and being vulnerable and stuff.
Right.
One of the things that I think Jessica and I have had, conversations about before, also in terms of connecting, is on a sexual level.
Sure.
I swear to you, Tony, sometimes I feel like I'm a 13-year-old boy. I just want to hump everything under the sun. And I feel like sometimes, like, where is that energy coming from? Because I'm 36, and it's just like, okay. And Jessica's, again, I'm sorry I'm sharing this, Jessica, but I needed to. She's not at that level.
Yeah.
I would say she's nowhere near it.
So are you taking testosterone treatment? Is that what you're saying? Are you, okay.
I don't know. I mean, I think eventually it'll probably peter out, but that I did bring that up as an example of we've had healthy conversations about that, and I just keep a lot of lotion around the house.
Oh man, I'm not touching that one with a 10-foot pole. Well, and so thank you for your honest sharing, because one of the thoughts I think that brings up for other people is this idea of how important it is to be able to talk about things.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when couples come in, for therapy, one of the things, and of course, maybe a lot of people, are familiar with this. It's when couples come into therapy, it's not uncommon for them to say, we just don't communicate. And usually there's a lot more behind that.
Right.
But I think what they're saying is, we just don't know how to talk to one another. And the problem with that is, so we have no way of being able to sharing our experience, what's our internal experience, what's happening for us, either interpersonally within the coupleship or for that particular, individual. They have no tools. Like, we have no ability to be able to share that with each other. And a lot of times what you'll see is there's defensiveness, and that blocks kind of any forward movement. In terms of safety. Again, we talk about that quite a bit, but so a lot of times in working with couples, like you're sharing, that is obviously a benefit, that the two of you do have, is it sounds like the two of you can talk, and it sounds like the two of you can share. And again, this is this idea that not everything's always going to match up.
No.
And in fact, quite often we're going to go through different phases in life. We're going to go through different stages. We're going to have different stressors, and things are not going to match up. I mean, that's just kind of the way life works, unfortunately. But being able to talk about it, and being able to share what's happening, and to be able to say, you're here, I'm here, there's a huge gap between us, and, what do we do about that?
Right.
or at least can you hear my experience, and can I hear your experience, and can we validate that and understand where we're both at? And, again, sometimes that alone is so healing.
Oh my gosh, like just... you don't have to find a solution every time. It's just
and
like
you're not.
listening. No.
Exactly.
No.
You're probably not always going to find a solution.
No, of course not.
You still may end up looking at each other going like, I don't know. You know, we
Yeah.
we still have an unknown here. We still
Sure.
have a gap. But a lot of times it's just enough to say, wow, you heard me.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm going through, and I understand what you're going through, and
Yeah.
you feel heard, and we're going to make it. You know, a solution will find itself, you know,
Yeah.
like we're going to figure out a way to, you know, kind of make this work. And that, again, is just so powerful. So a lot of the couples work will, you know, work for certain couples. It's important that communication be a focus of therapy because, yeah, if they're not able to communicate, you know, to one another, then it's going to really be difficult for them to be able to share their experience, right? And how do we get to intimacy? How does somebody really get to authentic sharing and vulnerability if they don't know how to communicate with each other, right? I mean, so it is one of those kind of core, you know, processes that I think it's really important for couples to be able to do is to be able to communicate.
How do you get you have a couple come in and they are clearly not communicating at all?
Right.
How do you get them to a point where they can?
Well, usually one of the first places that you want to start is just what we call active listening.
Right.
It's just learning to listen. And, you know, I don't know if this is true. It feels true, so I'm going to say it. And I could be wrong, but again, feels accurate. I don't think human beings are great listeners. Maybe we're not taught to be great listeners. Maybe that's a learned thing. I'm not quite sure. But I think we tend to want to share what's happening for us more than we're generally interested in listening to the other person. And I think we're usually building a defense. You know, and particularly for couples who have been maybe arguing for years, maybe they're you know, poor communicate. I usually ask clients if they, you know, if I see a particular dynamic happening, you know, maybe there's an escalation in the room, they're getting angry with one another. I'll usually stop them and say, is this pretty normal? I mean, is this, you know, am I observing kind of exactly what happens at home? Is this kind of the argument, so to speak, or the way it's worked, or the way the two of you are trying to communicate with one another? And yep, you know, this is it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you've got the snapshot. And I'm like, great, thank you. You know, so what I would like to do a lot of times in that, you know, that exact moment is we do a technique. It's speaker listener, and I believe it's the Baders who kind of pioneered this. But it's one person's going to be the speaker and one person's going to be the listener. And we're going to, as the first person gets to share their experience with the other, instead of processing what the other is sharing and developing, you know, the defense, you know, I think of this as a trial, you know.
You're like already building
You're
like
already,
what you're going to
you're already building
with.
what you're going to respond, how you're going to, you know, you're going to destroy the evidence of the other person who's sharing their experience. What I usually say is, you know, this isn't a court of law. You're not on trial with one another, although you might have tried that with each other in the past, or that's what it's felt like. Oh, you know, we're going to do something completely different. And we're not going to get into the truth, because I always tell them, I don't believe in a truth.
Right.
You know,
right.
I believe you both bring your own perceptions into your relationship. And the best we're going to do, which I think is great, is for the two of you to understand the perception of your partner. I mean, that is huge. I mean,
Right.
that is such a huge, you know, valuable skill, is if you can hear your partner's perception. You know, that is, you know, absolutely one of the keys to progress, is being able to do that. So we do the speaker listener where, you know, again, one partner gets to share their experience of something and maybe a feeling, and the other partner, non-defensively, is going to reflect back what they heard. So, you know, what I heard you share was da 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 da.
Okay.
And we practice that, and we keep practicing that, and they practice at home, because again, that's going to be the valuable tool and skill set that they're going to need when we start talking about potentially very, you know, deeper issues, maybe more emotionally triggering, you know, maybe there's trauma, maybe there's deep hurts and pain, and they're really going to need this skill, you know, as we go deeper into their psychotherapy or marriage and family therapy. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I keep hearing over and over again, even, you know, in other episodes of You, Me, Empathy, communication, safety,
Yeah.
authenticity, vulnerability, listening,
Right.
you know, being empathetic.
Yeah. Yeah. Empathy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
that's appropriate, right?
Yeah.
Or well, yeah. Well, and I think
Yeah.
good empathy comes with listening, right?
Totally.
I think if you can hear your partner's perspective on something without becoming defensive, without thinking about how they're wrong, because what I always tell people are, feelings aren't wrong. Your feelings can't be wrong. They're just feelings.
Right.
And a lot of times, again, it's so validating when a partner, gets to hear maybe for, one of the first times or first few times or whatever, when they stop and are able to say like, so I'm hearing that you're scared, or I'm hearing that you're fearful, or I'm hearing that you are angry, or you're disappointed. And I've just felt that, the air in the room switch almost immediately sometimes when that's happened, and just the tensions just quickly dissipate. And I've seen people be brought to tears, when they've, a single statement like that, I see that I hear that you're scared. And just that moment of being known, right? That moment of safety, that moment of having expressed something and it being heard and validated. So it can be so powerful and so amazing and so changing in a coupleship. I mean, really so impactful.
Yeah.
So.
And I imagine it helps to dissolve the stigmas around certain feelings.
Yeah. Absolutely. Kind of like there's no, a feeling's a feeling.
Yeah. Anger is a valid feeling.
Anger's a valid feeling. Yeah. Disappointment's a valid feeling.
And having that perspective of validity of those feelings creates the opportunity to learn about them.
Absolutely. That's why I always say, feelings give us the opportunity to explore something further.
Yeah.
And what I try and work, if there is a lot of defensiveness in a particular, client or coupleship, what I usually try to kind of frame it as is like, we don't necessarily know what's behind the anger. You're kind of assuming that it's about you. And therefore, you're quickly going into a defensive posture. So you're no longer listening. You're in maybe more of a fight or flight type of response. And so, prefrontal cortex, going more offline and you're, kind of getting into your fight stance. And so you're thinking defensively and, your physiology is escalating. And, so, we're also trying to calm clients down, during those escalations as well. Some, centering, breathing. Kind of, reducing their sympathetic responses so they can be more in the moment, hear their partner, and be able to really talk about, again, the feelings. And again, a lot of times not even about what's being discussed or the way in which the partner thought those feelings were intended. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the disappointment goes a lot further back into childhood, and they're just talking about something in the present that maybe reminds them of that feeling. And they've never been able to do that before. They've never been able to get that validation. So, yes.
Lovely.
It's amazing. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
I love it when partners, start to do this work and then they get to really start to explore these emotions and these different feelings of, within a coupleship of safety. And they really get to see where maybe some of the early wounds are, and maybe where some of the repetition of old behaviors and or expectations or templates are, and they get to change those dynamics. It's really amazing and just extremely powerful.
Yeah.
And transformational. I mean, it can be so transformational within a coupleship.
Yeah. I mean, it's challenging for sure, but
absolutely.
But so worth it.
It's not easy work.
No,
I mean, no. I mean, it's definitely not easy work. But I think the benefits and the payoff of them can be so life-changing and so transformational to help people finally find the intimacy that we're talking about, the connectiveness, the safety, and the relational satisfaction and happiness, that they probably got into a relationship for, the primary intentions of the relationship was for that relational satisfaction and connectedness and happiness. So
awesome. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Thanks for being here, Tony Pants.
Always a pleasure.
For you listeners, if you haven't left Yumi Empathy a review in iTunes, please do that. I feel like I'm speaking into the ether. No one's listening, so prove me wrong and hear my voice, hear my desperate plea for validity in the form of 5 stars on iTunes. and nice words sent my way.
Do we call that overt? That's not covert. I
Yeah,
think
that's overt.
That's overt.
That's straight up overt.
Yes.
And, hit me up on Twitter or Instagram at Yumi Empathy. And thanks so much for listening. Thanks to my friend Tony for being here.
My pleasure.
And to you listeners, as always, I'm here, you're here. We're here together on this way world.
Way world.
Big blue
marble. What do I call it?
Overwhelming, awe-inspiring, pale blue marble. We have each other. It's Yumi Empathy.